One general theme of Native American epistemology is what we could call the importance of embodied knowing. The importance of embodied knowing. And in order to explain this concept of embodied knowing, I want to take a few steps back and do some review of ground we've covered already so far. So we have been talking already in past modules about knowledge and knowing. And in the way we've been talking about it, we've talked about belief as a kind of mental model or representation of the world. And a belief is a mental model that we think matches reality. When it actually does match reality, we call that truth. And now we can see that that is a specific way of thinking about truth. That would be like a correspondence theory of truth. But that's not the only way of thinking about truth as we saw in previous videos. But if we think about truth that way and we think about belief as a mental model, we can think of knowledge as a belief that has a certain kind of status. Knowledge is a true belief, but remember, you can have a belief that's true just by accident or just by good luck. And that doesn't count as knowledge. Knowledge is somehow secure, or more secure than just good luck. It's somehow well, as I suggested, you can think of knowledge as a kind of belief that results from our mind actually coupling with the world, so that the beliefs that I have are a result of connecting with the world. And if the world was different, then my beliefs would be different. Now, one way to have that kind of connection is through evidence. And so we get the JTB theory, justified true belief theory of knowledge. And that's been a common theory of knowledge in Western epistemology. One thing that we can notice now, if we just kind of take a few steps back, is that all of this way of thinking about knowledge has to do with what is called propositional knowledge. Propositional knowledge. A proposition is the meaning of a declarative sentence. That's what a proposition is. So, not propositional knowledge is knowledge that can be expressed in a proposition or in a declarative sentence. So, propositional knowledge is knowing that something is the case. I know that my books are on the shelf. I know that my shirt is black. I know that my wife is trustworthy. I know that rattlesnakes are dangerous. That's propositional knowledge. And in Western philosophy, especially since the modern era, like roughly starting with Descartes, Western philosophy has had a strong emphasis on propositional knowledge and propositional knowing. The thing is, there are other kinds of knowledge or other kinds of knowing. So one other important kind we could call procedural knowledge. Procedural knowledge. And that's knowing how to do something. Propositional knowledge is knowing that something is the case. Procedural knowledge is knowing how to do something. So when propositional knowing goes well, it produces beliefs that are true and connected to the world. When procedural knowledge goes well, it results in skills that enable us to connect with the world well. And interestingly, propositional knowledge is stored in a different kind of memory than procedural knowledge is. It's interesting to think about procedural knowing, the ability to do things as a kind of knowing. This might be a new idea for you. And you can ask yourself, why should we think of a skill as a kind of knowledge? And I think the answer to that is because skills involve connecting yourself, your whole body, mind, self to the world. And that's fundamentally what knowledge is about, is connecting the self to reality. At least that's one way of thinking about reality. So skills or procedural knowing actually help us do that. And procedural knowing also involve tacit models or representations of reality. So here, let me give you an example. Knowing how to ride a bike. You might know how to ride a bike. I know how to ride a bike. And knowing how to ride a bike, that's procedural knowledge. It's procedural knowledge. But notice how when you know how to ride a bike, it requires knowing exactly how to turn the handlebars to correct for an overbalance. It requires knowing how to turn the pedals, how to stay balanced at different speeds. All of that knowledge, though, is not explicit propositional knowledge in your head. You know, it's not like you know in your head, if I turn the handle 3 degrees to the left, then I have to shift my weight this direction or that direction. That's not how it works. The way it works is like think about how you learning to ride a bike. You get on it, you fall. You get on it, you try to ride, you fall. You get on it, you ride a bit longer, you fall. You get on it again, you ride it a bit longer, you fall. What's happening is that each time you engage with the bike, your understanding of how the bike reacts and interacts with you gets a little more detailed, gets a little more detailed. You know, before you even know how to ride a bike, you see a bike and it's just there. Your understanding of it is very simple. But as you interact with it, you start to know how the bike will react to you and interact with you in various situations. But all of that knowing, if I do this, the bike's going to do that. All of that knowing is not explicit. It's not at the level of propositional knowing. It's encoded into your nervous system. But if you were to try to explain to someone in propositional terms, here's how you do it, you're probably not going to be able to do it very successfully. And if you were to read a book about how to ride a bike, that's not going to enable you to just jump on the bike and ride. You have to interact with it over and over, and that's how you come to know the bike. So this is just another example of how procedural knowing how to ride a bike, actually is like very intimate contact with a bike, knowing how a bike works. And for many of us, once we learn how to stay balanced and, get around, we stop really paying attention and trying to know the bike in a deeper way. But people who do keep practicing, paying attention, they know the bike even more intimately and they can basically dance with their bike. People can do amazing things with bicycles. So this is an example of procedural knowing. And the better procedural knowledge you have, the more skill you have, the better you are able to interact with the world. Procedural knowing is important for a number of reasons. Here's one. Propositional knowing depends on procedural knowing. Because if you think about it, forming a reasonable belief, how does that happen? It happens through doing certain activities, like observing, like remembering, like understanding evidence, perceiving something, understanding what I'm perceiving, comparing that to other things I know and believe, listening to other people, understanding what they say, asking questions, evaluating someone's trustworthiness, evaluating the reliability of evidence. All of these things are activities. They're cognitive activities. And so what that means is that these activities are producing propositional knowing. The activities themselves are procedural knowing. They're skills that we can do better and worse. So another way to see this is that propositional knowledge depends on procedural knowledge, but procedural knowledge typically does not depend on propositional knowing. Like once you know how to ride a bike, you could talk about it, you could write down propositions about how to ride a bike. But before you know how, you won't be able to write down propositions about how to do it. So you need the procedural knowledge first. Okay, so I've distinguished propositional knowing from procedural knowing. There are at least two other kinds of knowing. So there's a philosopher and cognitive scientist, John Vervaeke, who's done very interesting work on this. And he has identified at least three kinds of knowing that are not propositional. So the procedural knowing is one of those. Another kind is what he calls perspectival knowing. Perspectival knowing is situational awareness. It's knowing what kind of situation you are in. So when you're in a situation, certain things stand out as relevant, stand out as important. And knowing what's important in a situation, what to pay attention to, this is perspectival knowing. So, for example, when you walk into a classroom on the first day of class, what are you paying attention to? Like it has a certain feel. You're going to be noticing some things and probably not others. Like you might notice how the desks are positioned. You might notice who is standing in the front, that they might look like the professor. You might not notice that there is a tiny little crack on the ceiling in the back corner. So your awareness is drawn to certain kinds of things. That situational awareness, knowing what kind of situation you're in and kind of picking up on the vibe, that is perspectival knowing. And you actually need that kind of knowing to know when to exercise your procedural knowledge, to exercise your skills. So if you walk into a classroom, you need to know the environment you're in. Like, okay, I'm in a classroom, so I'm going to use my skills of speaking and engaging with people and not my skill of bike riding here and now in this situation. So there's procedural knowing, there's perspectival knowing, and then there is also participatory knowing. Participatory knowing is the actual live engagement with the world. So for a bicycle, it's like the actual riding of the bike, my body moving with the bike, it affecting me, me affecting it. So then to summarize, we have propositional knowledge, and then we have at least three other kinds of knowing: procedural, perspectival, and participatory. And all of those other three are embodied. They're embodied forms of knowing. Okay, now having said all of that, one of the general themes of Native American epistemology is the importance of embodied knowing. Native American epistemology has an emphasis on embodied knowing, and given what we've covered so far, it makes sense. Because if you think that the ultimate purpose of knowledge and of knowing is to put us on the right path, to help us know how to live, to help us know how to fulfill our responsibilities and live in harmony with other humans and the non-human world, then just racking up lists of facts of propositional knowledge, that's not going to be very useful. We do need propositional knowledge. And within Native American epistemology, there's lots of propositional knowledge. And within oral cultures, there's lots of propositional knowledge, way more than Europeans typically thought. But unlike in Western philosophy, where there's a primary emphasis on propositional knowing, knowing that something is true, in Native American epistemology, there is a strong emphasis on the embodied knowing. Here's an example to kind of help you get the feel of what I'm talking about. Think about knowing a person. How would you go about knowing a person? Well, you can start learning some facts about them. Like you can just ask them, what's their name? You can learn their name. You can learn what their major is. You can learn where they were born and so on. You could also try to get to know that person by kind of treating them scientifically. Like you could put them in a scanner and see what their brain is doing, and you could measure the electrical conductance of their skin, and you could, measure all these sorts of things. And that will give you some information about that person. But obviously, That will be inadequate if you're really trying to understand a person really deeply. That will give you some of the picture, but not even close to the whole picture. In order to really understand a person, you do need to start learning facts about them. But in that whole process, what are you doing? You're observing them really carefully. You're paying attention to them. You are, you have to respect them because if you're working with a person, if you disrespect them, then they're going to close up. There will be parts of them that I will never know because they won't let me know them. That's just natural, right? That's how people work. And so I need to respect them in order to actually understand them deeply. And I need to engage with them. I need to interact with them. I need to be with them in different kinds of situations. In other words, I need to be practicing my embodied knowing skills with them. And that's how I can deeply understand a person. I will be forming propositional knowledge about them, but that is just one layer of knowing. I need to do the embodied knowing as well. Now, if we just take that idea and expand it across everything that can be known, now we're starting to get toward the Native American way of thinking about epistemology. So the embodied knowing, that direct relating with reality in a respectful way, this is one of the important themes in Native American epistemology.